Surely they're not giving out a basket of butter at the arcade machine. Like, are we trying to say?
Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs. The Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host with the toast, Rye Toast here to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's. I have had an exhausting couple of weeks, so if I seem a little low energy, I just wanted to say at the jump, I'm okay. I'm not depressed or anything. I have ADHD and stuff, but like I'm not sad. We're good. I'm just very tired. I've been trying to set up a pool for like a week now. It's essentially my wife's parents have a very old pool. I think the pump itself is like 15 years old. The pool is 20, and it's not like an in-ground pool, right? So it's aged. And they were going to take it down this year, and we were like, well, the kids really want to swim. Tell you what, before you guys take it down, let me just invest the time, the money. Let me try to fix up your guys' pool, because it's a win-win. Either I fix up your guys' pool and the kids can play in it for this season, or I break it and you guys were getting rid of it anyway. So like it's a good practice for me, right? So like when we eventually have a pool, I'll have had this hands-on experience on maintaining and fixing up a pool. The first like 4 days were fun. It's been hell since. So they didn't open their pool this year. Which means it sat in the heat for a month. And their cover had ripped halfway through the winter. So the water underneath is like a deep pond green. And the cover, it has like a good 1 or 2 inches of sludge just from like leaves and shit falling on and deteriorating on top. And that sludge looks and smells like shit. So the first day, the most exhausting, was pull that cover without ripping it more and get it into like a tight bag, then get into the like 4 inches of pond water that are still in the pool. Cause we did like sump pump as much as we could. There's still like a good 4 inches of like greenish, blackish water. Get in there barefoot, because look, I'd rather risk an infection than ruin like one of my 2 pairs of shoes. So hopped in, get underneath this like Tide bag of sludge and just lift it out of the pool. So that was awful. I got covered in it. It stunk terribly. Not the worst smell I've ever endured, but I did need to hose off and then shower twice afterwards. But once that was dealt with, and then I bucketed a bunch of the water out until it was like mostly like half an inch of water. Like if you can't, it's not safe to fully dump a pool because the water is part of what keeps a pool structured. So like I would get it down to like 2 inches and then fill it back up, 2 inches, fill it back up. And then at this point, the water was like a murky green. I'm like, all right, let's fill it. Filled up the water to under the filter line. Meanwhile, their filter and pump, crazy. So it's not PVC. It is vacuum hose, which is fine, but it's 10-year-old vacuum hose with duct taped joints. So I had to basically take it all off, get new vacuum hose, use some water weld, use some flex glue, some metal like fasteners, and just like redo all of the tubing essentially. And that was a whole issue. That took a lot of doing. And then lo and behold, I didn't actually start with flex glue, I believe was the last thing. It's like their caulk. It was the last thing I used. I started with water weld. In the future, you don't need water weld. I think like any kind of plumber's paste and that like doesn't harden but just like solidifies with a metal fastener, more than enough. The water weld was way too much, to be honest. Not necessary. And that's what this is for. Get all the connections good, and all the connections are good, except I run the pump and filter and the jet that goes back into the pool has a valve. That valve, water's coming out of. I was like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. And replacing the jet in the pool, now that the water is above the jet, I would have to dump like a foot of water and replace that jet. So I'm like, okay, we're not doing that. So I literally let it leak out, put the valve on the top, dried it, and then I just filled it with flex paste. Like I have not flex paste, flex glue, the one that's like in a caulk gun, CAULK, like the one that's it's like what you would fit like plumbing fixtures with. But I just filled that valve. I did like 3 layers to just like solidify it. I'm like, this valve will always be open now, but water won't leak out of it. So because it was coming out of the valve handle. But yeah, that was not fun. Like getting the chemicals right, testing the water, cleaning it up, that was fun. Doing the tubing, that was fun. It was making sure there were no leaks in the connections was not fun. But I'm just beat from all that. That's been my whole week. And it was funny because I told her dad that I was like, listen, I bet you within 4 days I can turn this water from like a semi-murky green to a clear. And he was like, all right, we'll see. And I keep telling him, like, it hasn't started yet because don't start the timer yet. The pump still doesn't work. So now the pump works. So fingers crossed. Anyway, that's why I'm kind of tired. But we should be talking about Five Nights at Freddy's, right? Today, I kind of just wanted to recap and go over any Into the Pit stuff. Speaking of, I wonder if Jeff's Pizza is up yet. Nope, not yet. So yeah, Into the Pit is the only FNAF game we have news about. Hopefully that changes within a week or so. Because for those who don't know, Help Wanted 2 Flat Mode, as of recording, comes out in 4 days. I'll be playing it the day after on Friday. Hopefully there isn't any like major spoilers or like people didn't find something already. Maybe I should push that to Thursday and just do a Thursday stream. I don't know, because like it's not technically a new release. It's the same game, but essentially when Help Wanted Flat Mode, so Flat Mode is the non-VR mode of the VR games. And when they added that to Help Wanted 1, they also added a secret bonus ending that teased the next Steelwool game. We basically got to see the Pizzaplex under construction. So like, are we going to see the teaser for the next Steelwool game with this Flat Mode? I don't know. They're treating it like a big release. They're doing like a whole countdown for it. And to be fair, for 80% of the fan base, this is the first time they're going to be able to play Help Wanted 2. So this is a big release. But I'm curious if they'll be adding that new secret ending that teases the next game. And if they do, is it going to be Fall Fest? I think Fall Fest is a big possibility, especially considering the fact that there's already so many Fall Fest teasers throughout Help Wanted 2. But I don't know. Yeah, maybe I'll play that the day of in case there's something breaking that we can talk about, and I'll just play it again Friday or something. I don't know. That being said, I did just worry myself where it's like, what if there is a teaser for the next game, I'm probably going to have to rush out a video Friday afternoon, like just wake up, just not go to bed Thursday night and just work through the night to get a FNAF video out 2 p.m. on Friday. We'll see. We'll see if I can. But whether or not that happens, the only FNAF game on the docket we know of is Into the Pit. And we've been getting a lot of news for Into the Pit with like trailers and screenshots. And I made a whole video going into like what we know going into it this past week. But I just kind of wanted to talk about it here in a more laid back fashion where I can kind of go in depth in certain things that didn't really fit in the video. So at the jump, if we're talking about the Into the Pit game, I feel like I have to address a debate I've seen, and that is this game canon? So up top, let's define our terms here. Scott has said multiple times, every official piece of FNAF is canon. The question people are really debating here is Into the Pit within the game's continuity? And I, like, on the face of it, obviously, you can't really nail this down until the game comes out, but just on the face of it, with the title of the game being Five Nights at Freddy's: Into the Pit, with the fact that it's presented and like made by a separate company, it's being shown in indie game showcases, it's available on all platforms at launch, the first FNAF game to ever do that, I see no reason to assume Into the Pit is outside of the game's continuity. Like, unless the game comes out and there's something major that we have to talk about, like as of right now, with the materials we have and the way the game is being presented, it seems to me incredibly likely that Into the Pit is in the game's continuity. I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't be the game we're talking about. So if that is the case, and Into the Pit, the game, is within the game continuity, which it most likely is, what does that mean? Because a lot of people I've seen say, if Into the Pit is canon to the games, then Stitchline is right, and most of the Fazbear Frights stories are also canon to the games. And that's the big debate. That's the big debate. I think debating, like, is the game itself outside of continuity pointless? I think it most likely definitely is. The question then becomes, if this game is in continuity, does that mean the story Into the Pit from Fazbear Frights and all associated stories are also in continuity? So that's the big question. And on the jump, maybe? For a claim that big and that hefty, I want to wait for the game to come out to, like, make a decision on it. Because, like, that affects a big chunk of the timeline and the majority of the timeline after it, right? Like, if Fazbear Frights are canon, then we know for a fact Burn Trap is not the corpse of William Afton, because the corpse of William Afton exploded in the Fazbear Frights. It is no longer around. So if Fazbear Frights are canon, it affects a lot of things. So for a decision that, like, instrumental, I want to wait for the full game to come out. Just to see what the full game is like, you know, and everything in there. Especially if the game is going to differ from Into the Pit itself, like the Into the Pit story. Because we know even from the, like, few trailers and screenshots we've gotten from this game and the description of the game itself, this game does differ a lot from the Into the Pit story. Now, I'm not saying this means they're separate stories, like, definitively or anything. What I'm saying is, I want to see what all the differences are before I start adding this game into my personal timeline, you know? So I think it's worthwhile to wait until the game comes out to make any definitive claims here, just to see how different the game is from the story. Because, look, the story itself may be fully in the same continuity, and the game may have significant differences from the story. Those can both be true. After all, the story itself, like the Into the Pit story, does not make for a good game. You need to adjust that story to gamify it and make it a compelling game. And I understand that. And if all of the differences seem likely to just be so that we can have a fun game to play, bada bing, bada boom, the story is most likely in continuity and with its associated stories with it. Like, that makes sense. But if we're playing it and there are, like, significant differences that are not for the sake of gameplay, then that brings into question, okay, is this the beginning of Scott putting the Fazbear Fright stories into continuity and adjusting them as he does it? Right? Because that's a big question I have. There's a non-zero chance that Into the Pit and any future games from Mega Cat Studios is going to be Scott's chance to say, I like these specific stories that we have produced for Five Nights at Freddy's, and I'm including them into the game's continuity, but I'm tweaking the contents of them into, like, as we do it. And that's what should be trusted. Because that is very, very possible. You know, especially considering what Help Wanted says about the lore, the idea of, like, the indie games being like, oh, modern game lore trumps older game lore. Trust the modern games first. The same thing could be said about the books here. If we have an Into the Pit game being added to the game's continuity, then if something from the game conflicts from the story, for the game continuity, we should trust what the game says first. That's my thought process. Not to mention Return to the Pit coming out. So there's 2 announced Choose Your Own Adventure like books for FNAF. I believe it's A Week Before and Return to the Pit. And they've been pretty on the nose saying like, yeah, these books are direct sequels or like parts of FNAF. Well, at least A Week Before, as far I'm pretty sure in the description says like a direct prequel to the game that started it all. So like, yeah, okay, this book pretty much, it's not out yet, but it seems like definitively this book will be in the game's continuity. So the second book in this series likely will be the same thing, Return to the Pit. If there are things in this book that contradict what we know from Fazbear Frights, I'm going to trust this book first. So likewise, I want to wait for this book to come out. A lot of people saw Return to the Pit as kind of like Scott double downing that Into the Pit, the story, is fully in continuity. And that may be true. But my brain goes, if we're writing another separate book about this damn ball pit, wouldn't it make more sense for this newer story to specify things in the lore that will be in the games that may or may not conflict with the original story? Right? Like, would it be that this story is just saying the same story again? Or would it be that this story is clarifying and delving more into the lore that is present in the games associated with this story? I don't know. Right? A lot of this debate is surrounding things that are not released yet, which is a little frustrating. So on the jump, I guess my take right now, and maybe this will make people mad. I feel like it's a fairly reasonable take. On the jump, my take. The Into the Pit game seems like it's definitely going to be in the game continuity. However, the Into the Pit game and Return to the Pit book may not fully line up with the Into the Pit story from Fazbear Frights. So until these 2 pieces of media come out and we can play and read them directly, I will hold off on saying that the Into the Pit Fazbear Frights story and all of its associated stories are in the game's continuity. Because if the Into the Pit Fazbear Frights story is fully in continuity, then the logic goes, so would the epilogues and several other stories from Fazbear Frights, because they are very connected, especially that ball pit. So I think my take is I would just want to wait and see. But the game itself, I don't think there's a point in arguing the game itself to not be in continuity. And I just remembered, like, before we even talk about the content of the games, which I want to, there is another massive issue with lore and speculation and theories about this Into the Pit game, and that's Easter eggs. So Easter eggs are already a thing in FNAF that we have to contend with. I think a perfect example in Security Breach are the arcade machines. I've seen some people say that the arcade machines that reference Fazbear Frights stories are direct evidence that Fazbear Frights are in the game's continuity. But the counter-argument that I agree with is that there are also arcade machines that reference fanverse games, or there's the Anxious Axolotl arcade machine, which references some steel wool work culture stuff. So I think the arcade machines are Easter eggs. I think they are just references for the fans, something to like, hey, here's something for the fans to be like, oh, I know what that thing is, that's cool, and move on. So Into the Pit has been directly stated to be chock full of Easter eggs because it's a 10th anniversary game. So because of that, everything we bring up in this godforsaken game that's in the background is going to be a question of, is this intentionally placed to tell us something about the lore of Five Nights at Freddy's, or is this a cool Easter egg? And that's going to be a big issue. Now, I'm not trying to say that Easter eggs are a bad thing. I love Easter eggs. I think they're such a fun part of franchise and like a loving way for a creator to be like, hey, this is for the fans. You know what I mean? I love Easter eggs. As a theorist, this is going to drive me crazy. Like, I can, look, as someone who has played Five Nights at Freddy's since FNAF 1, there are things that I love about this franchise that do make me want to throw my head against a wall. That one of those things is going to be Easter eggs. And here's a perfect example just from the things we have seen so far. There's an arcade machine with Helpy on it. Okay, is Helpy an Easter egg? Well, there's also a leaked screenshot of a location, the mill, which we don't see in the story but is referenced. And in the dump, there is a Helpy shell with other FNAF 6 stuff. Okay, so is Helpy a thing? Well, to be fair, in the modern day, yes, and this could even be the FNAF 6 trash from after that thing. That's possible. But then again, the Helpy arcade machine is from the flashback, which would be in 1985. So is this game saying that Helpy existed all the way back in 1985? Well, it's possible, especially if Helpy is a fun time, as he kind of looks like. But is it just an Easter egg? Even more abstract, there's a Jacko Chica arcade machine, a character from the FNAF Halloween update, which, as far as I'm aware, until Help Wanted, was not canon. Not in continuity. But then Help Wanted comes out and it has Jacko Chica in it, which, like, okay, that's fair. Help Wanted is talking about the indie games. If FNAF 4 is an indie game, that makes sense. But if Jacko Chica was an invention for Help Wanted, what is it doing in 1985? Was Jacko Chica part of Fall Fest? Or is this an Easter egg? It gets worse. In the prize vending machine, there is a bounce pot. This is an enemy from FNAF World, a game that, as far as we're aware, may be one of the very few Scott-made games that is not an in-universe indie game, which would mean bounce pot should not exist in the actual, like, material timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's, but there it is as a toy you can win in 1985. So is bounce pot a character from the show or something? Or is this an Easter egg? Not even to talk about, next to it in the fucking prize vending machine is exotic butters. Surely they're not giving out a basket of butter at the arcade machine. Like, are we trying to say that the 1985 Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was giving out fucking butter as a reward? Or is it an Easter egg? That's going to be a lot of the debate around this game. I think it's very clever, actually. This year of releases feels like the year of Scott giving us the most amount of information possible and keeping as much of it ambiguous as possible. For example, the whole Easter egg versus canon lore thing. Another example, we are getting a book called A Week Before. I already talked about it. It's the Choose Your Own Adventure book. It is described to be a direct prequel to FNAF 1, possibly giving us information and insight onto a part of the timeline we have never seen before. Direct information about Phone Guy and his motivations and what is happening at the FNAF 1 Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. It's a Choose Your Own Adventure book, though, and there's like 25 endings. Meaning Scott is releasing a book that's telling us the exact direct story for FNAF 1. But it's mixed in with 24 incorrect stories of FNAF 1. Whoo, Scott, you devil. I've said it before, but when I get my hands on you, I swear. Let me talk to him. But hey, we're 20 plus minutes into a podcast. Let's talk about Into the Pit, shall we? Like the game itself. Straight up, it looks incredibly peak. It looks so good. Everything about it looks good. It's shaping up to be probably definitely in my top 5 FNAF games, possibly top 3. If it's good enough, maybe number 1. I've sat down before and I think like ranking FNAF games for me goes like, I think Help Wanted 2 is my favorite FNAF game, but that's probably because it's the most fun to play. But as far as like compelling FNAF games go, I think I go Help Wanted 2, FNAF 1, Help Wanted 1. And then maybe Ruin separately, then like FNAF 4, FNAF 3. And then the rest kind of get jumbled. I think that's where I'm at. But regardless, Into the Pit has the chance to usurp any of those because it looks really good. I'm trying not to get my hopes too high, but like everything about it looks very, very good. Notably, on the website, they mention fatal minigames will be uncovering lore, which to me, it could be 2 things. One, it could literally just be like minigames that you could die during, but that sounds like a death minigame. Like the classic, Every time you die, there's a random chance to see a minigame that gives us really specific, important lore. I wonder what it would tell us, though. Now, I said almost the same thing in this week's video. Like, what would a death minigame tell us that this game already isn't? Because this game already is telling us the missing child incident. In a way, like, we have that GIF that is on their website where it's literally a room of dead bodies and Spring Bonnie turning to look at us. Like, that's crazy. But a couple things about the missing child incident with this. One, I've seen people on Twitter, and I mentioned this in the video, say that there are 6 bodies here. And it kind of does look like that. Now, I'd want to play the game before I definitively believe there are 6 bodies, especially if it's not mentioned in the game. But it does look like there are 6 bodies. And Into the Pit, the story, and the graphic novel both say 6 bodies, not 5, which I've previously used as evidence to say that this is not a canon interpretation or in continuity interpretation of the missing child incident because the MCI is 5. But if it is 6, the question is, who is this 6th body? I've seen some people say Cassidy or the vengeful spirit, but in my opinion, Cassidy is the vengeful spirit, is the one who should not have killed. Meaning, they were killed in Golden Freddy. So they would be the 5th kid. Like, they would be one of 5. So it doesn't make sense for Cassidy to be the 6th kid, in my opinion. I've also seen people say Andrew, but to me, the logic still lines up there. If you believe Fazbear Frights are canon and that Andrew is the one you should not have killed, wouldn't Andrew then just be the 5th kid in Golden Freddy? Not to mention, like, stories like The New Kid, where there's a body in Golden Freddy with black curly hair, and Andrew has black curly hair. So, like, to me, Andrew or Cassidy, whoever you believe the vengeful spirit or the one you should not have killed is the 5th kid of the MCI. So my brain then goes to Charlotte. So, because Charlotte, like, is a good maybe here. We know she dies around the same time as the missing child incident. And her body is found. She's left in an alleyway. So, like, she's not missing. But this isn't the MCI. Right? It's most likely Into the Pit is an agony-induced hallucination from the memories of the victims of William Afton. So this is more like an interpretation, which then makes more sense because it would be saying that, like, Charlotte's agony is somewhat intertwined with the missing child incident. They're all victims of William Afton. And that tracks with how Charlotte has been presented in the past. In FNAF 2, they're linked together. In Happiest Day, they're linked together. In Help Wanted 2, both endings have 6 kids. And it's the missing child incident and Charlotte. So, like, that tracks. But we should back up really quick. Agony-induced hallucination? Time travel has no precedent in Five Nights at Freddy's and is very unlikely to be the case of Into the Pit. However, agony affecting people's memories does have precedent in these stories. Ultimate Custom Night is implicitly explained as agony manifesting different memories in the epilogues. Not to mention, explicitly, Eleanor uses agony to trap a detective in, like, a fucked up version of her memories and his memories. So, like, this is a thing that can happen, and we know that the ball pit is filled with agony. So I think it's much more likely, and many people think it's much more likely, that Oswald is going into this ball pit and receiving these memories and hallucinations. He's not actually going back in time. So if that's true, how does this affect the game? Well, one, what we're seeing is not fully accurate to 1985's Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, however close it may be. Perfect examples of this are things we see like Bonnie and Chica attacking Oswald. First of all, does not happen in the story. That's an important difference. But it seems very likely that these are like agony creations like Pit Bonnie. After all, we get a close-up of an agony Freddy in like a tile puzzle on the website, and he's got the same like organic fleshy mouth that the Pit Bonnie does. So these seem like they're agony monsters. Not to mention, the game's description says we can save the kids' lives who are at stake. And we know that doesn't happen. But the question then is, like, okay, so we're modifying these memories so they survived. To what end are we doing this? Well, I think it's very close to what we see at the end of the Fazbear Frights epilogues. So in the end, Jake, who is in the Stitch Wraith, falls into the ball pit. And it's like his last act is using his remnant and his control over memory and reaching into the agony memories of the souls in this ball pit and helping them find peace. It doesn't seem like they're moving on, but it seems like he's visiting their memories and helping them break out of the horrible like nightmares they're trapped in. So to me, that's kind of what this game is looking like, where we're going into these memories of the victims of William Afton and we're trying to save them so in their own little purgatory, they're at least at peace and they can rest. They maybe not are able to move on, but they can rest. I took a little long, so nap time is ending. My wife is handling it, but in case you hear like baby cries or footsteps or wheels or stuff, that's what's going on above me. I don't know if the mic is picking it up or not. But that's pretty much all I have to say about Into the Pit as of now. Hopefully jeffspizza.club comes out and it's like got a lot of cool stuff on it. I don't know. I wish the team the best of luck with the website and with the game itself. But yeah, we're going to move on to questions. So if you have any questions, you can send them to Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. It's on screen. It's in the description. You can copy and paste it. It's a pain to type out. It's Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. You can also send them in on Spotify. There's a Q&A feature, I believe. But our first question comes from Leah, she, her. It's a big one. It's a big one. Do you think Edwin is canon to the game's timeline? Or Henry takes the place of Edwin in the games and was the one who created the mimic? If I'm already talking about Fazbear Frights, I might as well talk about Tales from the Pizzaplex. Get everybody a little angry. I admit, if any books, like if any book series is most likely to be in the game's continuity, it is Tales from the Pizzaplex. I think Tales from the Pizzaplex has the best shot at being in the game's continuity. That being said, I have yet to see really compelling evidence for Edwin and David specifically, the creator of the mimic. Because we have the mimic, right? Its physical description doesn't perfectly line up, but it can repair itself, so that can be explained away. We have the mimic, but we've had the mimic for like 30 seconds. So I want to see how it acts a little more, and see like more about it. I think generally Edwin and David being canon, like if the way my timeline kind of is right now, if Tales from the Pizzaplex are in the game's continuity, doesn't really change much, right? Like it just kind of changes who made the mimic and why. Whereas like if the Tales from the Pizzaplex are canon, okay, Edwin made the mimic, cool, moving on. If the Tales from the Pizzaplex books aren't in the continuity, then we have to figure out who made the mimic, and it seems most likely that Henry would have, either for Fall Fest or maybe in trying to bring back Charlie or something like that. It's hard to tell. But just reading Tales from the Pizzaplex, like there's not a huge change in the timeline if they are in continuity. So as of right now, I've kind of stopped thinking about it until like more games come out from Steel Wool. Because there are other parts of the timeline that I'm more focused on solving, for my timeline that the Tales from the Pizzaplex games don't really affect, right? Like whether or not Tales from the Pizzaplex is in continuity, FNAF 6 to Help Wanted 1, huge explanation that we need. Is that Fazbear Frights? Maybe Into the Pit is going to tell us that it's Fazbear Frights. But if it's not Fazbear Frights, that's a big gap we got to figure out. And Tales from the Pizzaplex doesn't really tell us much about it. So yeah. Not to mention, here's a big one. Even if Tales from the Pizzaplex is canon, the mimic we see in game maybe isn't the mimic that Edwin created, because Fazbear did create an entire line of mimic endoskeletons. So it's a big old question mark there. I would say my gut feeling is that Henry's the one who made the mimic and Edwin and David are not canon to the games. But there's just a lack of evidence on all fronts for that, to be honest. So yeah, I don't know. But thank you for your question. Cyrus Frost. Our next question comes from Cyrus Frost. He, him. Thank you for your question. What if, and I've seen this a lot, I think I've addressed this before, I'm not sure, but I wanted to address it now since I'm already talking about Into the Pit. What if the books are literally in the games? Fazbear Inc. hired an indie game developer. What if they also hired a writer to write some stories to obfuscate and distract from what happened, and the arcade of Plush Trap and Fetch arcade games are based off of those books that patrons of Fazbear could read? I don't think this would apply to Tales from the Pizzaplex, but I could see Fazbear Frights being actually books in-game. I've seen that a lot, and I don't see solid evidence for that theory. Like, as a what if, it does make sense. I've seen people be like, oh, well, what if this? And like, on the face of it, sure, what if? But I just don't see great evidence for it. I think if the Fazbear Frights books are connected to the game's timeline, it's that they're in continuity. I don't think they exist as books in universe. I just don't see a good reason for that. Although, if Into the Pit the game comes out and it's drastically different from the book, like drastically different from the book, which I don't think it will be, but if it is, then we have to have another debate. Are they both in the game's continuity? Right? Because there's the option where one of them is, and that's a pretty straightforward answer. But there's a possibility that both of them are in the game's continuity. And you might be saying, like, how could both of them be? Well, that would be the question. Is the book what actually happened and the game an indie game that Fazbear hired to be created? Or is the game what actually happened and the book is something that Fazbear hired to write? So, like, there's a lot of fun little options there that I think, it's one of the really fun parts about Five Nights at Freddy's, that, like, there are so many possibilities on how you interpret what is even true, that so many different timelines could be created. I think that's one of the strongest points of Five Nights at Freddy's, that, like, there are so many different ways to interpret this story. And that's why I don't understand why people get mad about debates. About like canonicity and stuff like that. Like, I understand, like, and I'm not saying like, I should be clear. You know, I make the joke of like, Twitter's going to hate this one. Not all like debate and criticism and trying to prove something is harassment or hate, you know? I think there are very healthy ways to be like, I believe this and here's me trying to prove it to other people. And there's very healthy ways to do that. But there are also people who genuinely get very angry about like, this is what I believe the interpretation is. It is true. And if you think anything else, you are obfuscating and you are pointlessly making things difficult. But isn't that the point of Five Nights at Freddy's? That everything is obfuscated? So you can interpret this story in so many different ways. I think it's a really fun part about the franchise. But thank you for your question, Cyrus. Our next one comes from Lily, she, her. How do you interpret the voice line, I recognize you, that Circus Baby says to the player in Help Wanted 2? Yeah, right? That last game of Help Wanted 2 is really weird. Circus Baby seems very familiar with us. To me, I think the Help Wanted 2 protagonist is Jeremy Fitzgerald. I also think the Help Wanted 2 protagonist is the Bonnie Bully. And if he is the Bonnie, and that feels more confirmed. Right, where like that seems more true, because like Jeremy Fitzgerald, FNAF 2, I admit that's a stretch, but the Bonnie Bully feels pretty solid with the mask at the end of the Princess Quest 4 ending. So if Help Wanted 2's protagonist is the Bonnie Bully, presumably he would have been friends with Michael Afton. So if he was friends with an Afton, he maybe was around more often than we realize. I kind of link Circus Baby's I Recognize You to the what makes you so special that Moon and Mystic Hippo and a bunch of other things say throughout that game. What makes the Help Wanted 2 protagonist so special is that he's been around since the beginning. He's part of the reason why the crying child is dead. He knew Michael Afton. He likely knew Elizabeth Afton. So that's probably why Circus Baby recognizes us. I also think the Help Wanted 2 protagonist is Cassie's father, but that seems also very direct. That does not seem like a stretch. But yeah, that's my interpretation. And our final, I'm sitting more and more like a bisexual as the time goes on. I'm just like trying to get comfy, man. Our final question comes from Robin, he, him, thank you for your question. I noticed a similarity between the Midnight Motorist Woods and Old Man Consequences Woods. This led me to speculate, what if Old Man Consequences was Mike? And he also includes that this would be a pun, Mike Consequences, my consequences. Sounds like the kind of the pun Scott would make. A young man's actions, crying child getting bit, would equal an old man's consequences. I'm suggesting that the OMC sequences are chronologically last in the timeline. Just a rusty robot corpse guy fishing in the woods near his childhood home. On the face of it, I kind of dig this interpretation. The idea that, like, because, right, who meets Old Man Consequences? The vengeful spirit and whoever is doing FNAF World. And the idea that in both of those, whenever someone goes too deep, they find a weird purgatory space of Michael just peacefully fishing. And Michael leans over and goes, trust me, I've been down this road. It isn't worth it. Just rest and move on. I like that a lot. I think I have one problem with it, and that's the connections between Old Man Consequences and the old man from Princess Quest. Which, to be fair, Princess Quest 1 through 3 still lines up, because that's still someone being like, hey, just rest. It's not worth this fight. Princess Quest 4 is weird, though. I, to this day, do not understand the purpose of the old man at the end of Princess Quest 4. When you give him the Vanny mask, he says it is a fair trade and gives you the glitch trap plushie. What the fuck does that mean? I cannot wrap my head around that. And that would also be like, why would Michael be involved in that? So that feels weird. But everything else, I do really like the idea of Michael Afton being Old Man Consequences. Really, really like that. I like it more than Henry, to be honest. But thank you for your question, Robin. But yeah, again, if you want your questions answered on the podcast, I kind of shot through them today, but we talked about Into the Pit for a while. You can send them into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. It's in the description, copy and paste, because it's a pain to type out. But until next time, thank you for watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.